Wrestling, in its most elemental form, is a contest of human will and physical prowess. However, to the trained eye, the chaotic flurries of a 6-minute match resolve into a clear and predictable application of scientific principles. It is not merely a battle of brute force, but a dynamic and complex problem of applied physics, biomechanics, and physiology. Victory is not awarded to the strongest or fastest athlete in a vacuum, but to the one who can most effectively manipulate the fundamental variables that govern human movement, balance, and endurance under duress. We are going to deconstruct the art of wrestling into 8 core scientific principles: mechanical advantage, the dominant angle, timing, off-balancing, fatigue, stance and defense, tie-ups, and finally, consistency and practice. Each of these principles represents a critical component in the intricate equation of dominance on the mat, while each principle is powerful in isolation. It is their synergistic integration, the seamless chain of a stable stance leading to a dominant tie-up, which creates the off-balancing required to establish an angle, exploited with precise timing and mechanical advantage to score, all while managing the physiological economy of fatigue that distinguishes the master practitioner from the novice. The objective is to move beyond the what of wrestling technique and into the deeper, scientific understanding of why it works. Let's begin with the adage, technique over strength, a cornerstone of wrestling philosophy. This is not a platitude, but a direct reference to the physical principle of mechanical advantage. Think of it like using a wrench. Trying to loosen a tight bolt with a short wrench requires a huge amount of muscular force. But if you use a long-handled breaker bar, the bolt comes loose with minimal effort. In wrestling, your body becomes a complex machine of levers and fulcrums. Controlling an opponent's wrist or ankle is like grabbing the end of that long breaker bar. You're using physics to multiply your force. The body's limbs function as levers, the joints act as fulcrums, and the opponent's body is the load. A classic example is the armbar, where your hips serve as the fulcrum against the opponent's elbow joint. By applying force to the opponent's wrist, the end of the lever, you can generate immense hyperextending force with minimal effort. Another perfect example is the cradle, where you're not just squeezing the opponent. You're using their own leg as a lever, prying their head towards their knee to create immense pressure at the fulcrum of their spine. Beyond levers, the concept of the wedge is critical. A wedge is essentially a moving inclined plane designed to force objects apart. In grappling, you insert parts of your body as wedges to create and maintain space. A knee shield and half guard or a butterfly hook are perfect examples. They create a strong skeletal frame that separates you from your opponent. This act of creating separation is often a necessary precursor to applying a lever. You can't effectively attack an opponent's arm if it is held tightly to their body, such as an underhook prying the arm away must first be used to create space and expose the limb, transforming it into an accessible lever. The human musculoskeletal system itself is an intricate network of levers. A key objective in hand fighting is to manipulate an opponent's limbs into positions of mechanical disadvantage, forcing their muscles to work inefficiently and compelling them to expend significantly more energy. Ultimately, a successful takedown is an exercise in generating sufficient torque to disrupt an opponent's stability. To maximize torque, you increase the length of the lever arm. Consider a single-leg takedown. By lifting the opponent's ankle, while simultaneously driving your head and shoulder into their hip, you create a powerful lever system that generates immense torque, making their base untenable. Now, let's talk about the geometry of the match. The concept of the dominant angle is a cornerstone of strategy. Think of it like a circuit board. A head-on attack is like trying to send a signal against a resistor. You meet direct opposition. Creating an angle is like finding an alternate pathway with no resistance. You're bypassing their defensive circuitry entirely. When two wrestlers face each other head-on, they are in a state of mutual defensive strength. The goal of creating a dominant angle is to move offline, positioning your body to the side of or behind the opponent. A common misconception is conflating motion with achieving an angle. Circling an opponent is the act of creating motion. The angle itself is the superior geometric position that is achieved only after you have successfully penetrated their first lines of defense. A tangible goal is to get your ear to their hamstring on a single leg. You guarantee you have a dominant angle. The creation of these angles is a dynamic process rooted in your stance. A dominant tie, such as the Russian 2-on-1, provides the leverage to physically pull an opponent out of their strong, square defensive posture. The power of a dominant angle is understood through physics. When attacking head-on, your force vector is met directly by their defensive force vector. By creating an angle, you are redirecting your force vector to target their instability rather than their power. Once an angle is established, the objective shifts to exploiting it by attacking where the opponent's joints are biomechanically weak. The human knee, for example, is a hinge joint with very little lateral stability. You can turn the corner, applying force laterally against the knee and exploiting its inherent structural weakness. Before any effective takedown can be executed, the opponent's structural integrity must be compromised. This is kuzushi, or unbalancing. It's important to distinguish between simply moving an opponent and truly off-balancing them. You can push an opponent all over the mat while they remain stable. Kuzushi is a specific, sharp action. A snap, a hard pull, a fake, that forces their body into a moment of structural chaos where they must react to avoid falling. It's about disruption, not just motion. A shuck by is a pure application of this. You pull the opponent forward, and just as they resist, you release and slide by, using their own reactionary force to create the opening. The goal is to continuously work to put the opponent into a state of kuzushi. The effectiveness of this lies in its ability to create a neurological window. When a person is off balance, their brain's primary priority is to regain stability. During this split second, you're not just compromising their physical structure, but also hijacking their brain's processing power. The classic model for any attack is 3 phases. First, kuzushi, breaking balance. Second, tsukuri, entering the technique. And third, keiki, the execution. A snapdown isn't a separate move from a double leg, it is the kuzushi phase. Even with a perfect setup, it's all worthless without timing. Timing is the invisible variable. Think of an opponent's movements as a continuous signal of actions and reactions. An expert sees a predictable waveform and can time their attack to hit at the peak of that wave, the moment of maximum vulnerability. The essence of superior timing lies in mastering the action-reaction principle. It is the ability to initiate an action with the specific intent of provoking a known reaction, and then launching the true attack into that reaction. For instance, when you snap an opponent down, the perfect moment to shoot is during their upward transition, when their own momentum makes it difficult to sprawl. This is often trained through reaction drills, where a wrestler must instantly execute a specific move tied to a random stimulus, training the nervous system to bypass conscious thought. Initiating a shot at the moment one of their feet is in the air, catching them when their base of support is dramatically reduced. While all this is happening, there is another battle being waged against the great equalizer, fatigue. Fatigue is the solvent that dissolves technique. The physiological onset of fatigue has direct and devastating consequences on biomechanical efficiency. Movements become sloppy, balance deteriorates, and reaction time extends. In essence, fatigue acts as a technique solvent, systematically de-skilling an opponent. Recognizing this, the strategic imperative becomes clear: impose as much stress on the opponent as possible. This is the art of weaponizing conditioning, often through invisible work, the constant, subtle pressure that is incredibly draining, like maintaining a heavy collar tie or constantly circling. Chain wrestling, seamlessly transitioning from one attack to the next, keeps the opponent on the defensive. Another core tactic is making the opponent carry your weight. Finally, there is a crucial psychological dimension. The goal is to break their will. When an opponent who is also tired realizes that you can and will maintain a high pace, it often causes a mental collapse that happens before the physical one. Every action originates from the stance. A strong stance is not passive. It is a stance in motion, with constant small adjustments to level and position. Its effectiveness is governed by the center of gravity and the base of support. By bending your knees and hinging at your waist, you lower your center of gravity and widen your base. A critical rule is where the head goes. The hits follow. Elite wrestlers transition fluidly between the staggered stance for forward-backward movement and the square stance for lateral stability. A sound defense is a layered system, the 3 H's of defense. Your head is the first line. If they pass it, your hands are the second line for hand fighting and down blocking. If they bypass both, your hips are the final and most powerful line of defense, primarily through the sprawl. A powerful cue for the sprawl is to try and put your shoelaces on the mat, forcing you to drive your hips down and through the opponent. Between the stance and the takedown lies the crucial domain of the tie-up. The goal is twofold, not just to secure your dominant tie, but also to actively prevent your opponent from ever getting comfortable or establishing their preferred tie. Simple wrist control is often the first rung on the ladder. It seems minor, but it prevents them from grabbing you and can be the entry to a more dominant tie like a Russian 2-on-1. There is a clear hierarchy of control. You might start with a collar tie, fight for inside control, and then upgrade to a truly dominant tie like a deep underhook. A dominant tie-up is not the end goal, it is the means to an end. You use the tie to off-balance the opponent and to create a dominant angle of attack. Finally, we come to the principle that integrates all the others: consistency and practice. This is the mechanism that forges these principles into a cohesive, automatic system. Consistency is the unwavering commitment to the daily grind, born from a mindset driven by your why, the deep intrinsic reason for your goals. The purpose of drilling is to move complex motor skills from the conscious to the subconscious mind. Elite skill acquisition comes from deliberate practice, not just hard training. This means every drill has a specific purpose, isolating a weakness and fixing it with focused repetition. As a coder, you can compare it to debugging. You don't just keep running a broken program. You isolate the bug, the technical flaw. Focus on fixing that specific line of code, the detail of the technique. After his only collegiate loss, he vowed to work so hard every day that he would become the toughest man in the world. His Iowa style of training was famously brutal, but his preparation was also holistic and intelligent. This unwavering consistency culminated in one of the most dominant performances in sports history, a gold medal at the 1972 Munich Olympics, won without surrendering a single point. Ultimately, consistency and practice serve as the great integrator. It is through thousands of hours of deliberate practice that a wrestler learns to fuse these principles into a single. The true mastery of wrestling does not lie in the isolated proficiency of any single principle. Elite performance is an emergent property of the dynamic interplay between these 8 fundamental elements. Imagine a high-level exchange. It begins with a solid stance. From there, a battle of tie-ups leads to one wrestler establishing inside control. They use this tie to apply constant pressure, initiating the strategy of fatigue. They execute a hard snap-down, a direct application of off-balancing. With precise timing, they anticipate the opponent's reaction to posture up, change levels, and shoot a double leg. The shot itself is an exhibition of mechanical advantage, made possible by creating a dominant angle with the initial tie. This entire complex strategy, executed in seconds, is not the product of chance. It is the result of thousands of hours of consistency and practice, where these individual principles were drilled until they fused into a single, subconscious, and instinctive response. By understanding not just what works, but why it works, we can move beyond mere imitation and toward true innovation. This interconnected system of principles is the scientific foundation upon which all champions are built.